Again, this is another sign of the times, an analysis, and a commentary. Matthew chapter 24, verse 7. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines, and pestilences, and earthquakes in diverse places. 8. All these are the beginning of sorrows. The Nepal Earthquake, 2015. Days after Nepal's worst earthquake in 80 years, the official death toll had risen to more than 7,000, and humanitarian aid was starting to flow to the capital. Kathmandu's airport had been so overloaded by aid and passenger planes that incoming flights sat for hours on the runway. Outside the capital, many of the worst-hit villages in the ridges around Kathmandu remain a black hole, surrounded by landslides that make them inaccessible even to the country's armed forces. The government is only gradually getting a grasp of the destruction in these isolated places. It is nearly impossible to identify which villages are most in need, and how many may be dead or injured. As assessments of the earthquake's destruction proceeded, the head of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization said that almost all the temples in Kathmandu's Durbar Square had fallen, and still relief supplies for earthquake victims have been piling up at the airport and in warehouses here. Because of bureaucratic interference by Nepalese authorities who insist that standard customs inspections and other procedures be followed, even in an emergency, officials of Western governments and aid organizations have said the bottleneck was the fact that the bureaucratic procedures were just so heavy, said the United Nations resident coordinator in an interview. So many layers of government and so many departments involved, so many different line ministries involved. We don't need goods sitting in Kathmandu warehouses. We don't need goods sitting at the airport. We need them up in the affected areas. Officials of aid organizations and Western governments have been grumbling about the Nepalese government since the earthquake, with a magnitude of 7.8 struck the country on April 25th, killing more than 7,000 people. Early complaints said the government had all but disappeared, a criticism that even top officials here acknowledged was fair. Everyone was panicked. Everything was closed. We all tried to save our lives, said the Joint General Secretary of the governing Nepali Congress. And some critics can say there was no proper coordination for the first 2 days. But sometime over the past week, the government revived. And that is when Western aid officials say government officials began insisting that a list of rules must be followed, even for emergency relief supplies. In other words, it's turned into another big mess, and this place was totally not prepared for an earthquake whatsoever. The delays were occurring not only at the Kathmandu airport, but at border crossings with India, and even at district headquarters across the country. And Nepalese journalists have quoted customs officials at the Indian border crossings as affirming that relief supplies needed to go through strict inspections. And time is essential. Planting season is 6 weeks away, and if you miss that, you'll need to deliver food aid for another 3 months. The monsoon is coming in 8 weeks, so it's a very precarious situation. The bureaucracy and political machinery in Nepal are unusually independent of each other, which has mostly been a good thing over the past 10 years, as the political process has been paralyzed by squabbling. Bureaucracy officials, however, take their jobs very seriously, and some might fear that if they do not document all aid distributions, they could later face accusations that they kept the goods for themselves. Outside Kathmandu, more victims of the earthquake were still being discovered. May the Lord rest their souls. Also, civil aviation authorities announced that they had closed the Kathmandu airport to the largest jets, or those weighing more than 196 metric tons, for fear they could damage the runways. And again, it's time for the spiritual and physical manifestation of the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 16, verse 17. And the seventh angel poured out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven, from the throne, saying, It is done. 18. And there were voices, and thunders, and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such as was not since humans were upon the earth, so mighty an earthquake, and so great. 19. And the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon came in remembrance before God, to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. 20. And every nation fled away, and the mountains were not found. 21. And there fell upon humans a great hail out of heaven, every stone about the weight of a talent. And humans blasphemed God because of the plague of the hail, for the plague thereof was exceedingly great. Yes, it's time for prophecy to be fulfilled. And all these are more signs. And this is the warning.